Ecclesiastes, which begins by saying the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Futility of futilities, says the preacher. Futility of futilities, all is futility. What advantage does a person have in all his work which he does under the sun? What advantage does a person have? A generation goes, a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Also the sun rises and the sun sets, and hurrying to its place, it rises there again, blowing toward the south and turning toward the north. And the wind continues swirling along, and on its circular course the wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To declare where the rivers flow, there they flow again. All things are wearisome. No one can tell it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. What has been, it is what will be. It is what will be. And what has been done is what will be done. So there is nothing new under the sun. If there anything which one might say, see this? It is new. It has already existed for ages, which were before us. Verse 11, there is no remembrance of the earlier things and of the later things as well, which will occur. There will be no remembrance of them among those who will come later still. So that's a really depressing passage, is it not? Doesn't that make you depressed? It says there's nothing happening around here. There's nothing new. Everything's like it's always been. Nothing's changing. What are we doing here? Have you seen the sign that says wage slave on the bumper sticker? Meaning I go to work every week, I get my money, I spend it. Go back next week, I have to because I got to get some more money. So I get some more money, I spend that, and it's all gone, and and there it goes. Year after year, time after time. It's all that happens. Nothing really happens around here. Which is really depressing. And so what we're going to do tonight, if I can do it, I hope we can do it well, is to go through and to look at the argument that Solomon makes about life under the sun. And so I would suggest up front that we should understand that we're talking about this as a life without God, a life just as we would observe only as a human. If we look around us and see this world and see this life, then it's a pretty depressing place. And I hope we will understand when we get to the end of Ecclesiastes, we will understand that God has much more planned for us, that we have a Creator to answer to, that we have a purpose, there is a purpose in mind for us, and that we have a place to go. And it's not like it sounds in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Does that make any sense? But if you leave God out of the picture, it's exactly like Ecclesiastes 1. All right? So that's the goal tonight. I asked my wife, who's a pretty wise gal, what she would look for if she were looking for a life that matters. In fact, it would be a good exercise for you just to, what would you measure? What would you check off? What would you measure if you were trying to say, my life matters? So think about that a minute. There's some folks came in late. Let's see. We do have material. I've got at least one more. Trey. Anybody else? Linda? And here's what Miss Pat told me. She said, someone to love you, number 2. Number 3, a purpose or a goal. It's not much fun when there's nothing to do, is it? Influence on others, communication, as an example. Balance, I'm not sure what she meant by balance, and gratitude. So those were the things that she wrote down in a short order when I asked her that. And I thought those were pretty good. Okay, that's good. I gave my book away, so I'll have to borrow yours a second. I want to call attention to to 2 things about the book. If you look at the If you look at the index, it tells you where we're going, and that's living virtuously, living courageously, living sacrificially, living joyfully, living graciously, living reverently, living triumphantly, living trustfully, living humbly, living wisely, living generously, and living expeditiously. So all of these things are properties of living a life that matters. And of course, being right with God is my answer. That would be the number 1 answer. And so it's interesting how we think about raising our kids, the education that we want them to have. Very often, teaching math for 51 years and being an advisor and as part of the advising system, I have one great story for you, which is very illustrative to me. But this, I was working with the honors program, and one of the things we did was help the advising center with undeclared majors. So you could be an undeclared major till the middle of your sophomore year at that point in time. And so I would talk with students as they made out their schedules and other times. And this young lady from South Arkansas had spent a year on campus, and then she went home and she came back and she came rushing in my office and says, I know what I want to do. She said, I know what I want to major in. And I said, oh, well, what would that be? She said, well, I want to be a pharmacist. And I said, well, okay, let's look in the catalog here, pre-pharmacy. I knew the math requirements, but I didn't know all of them. And so the first thing it said was chemistry. And I said, well, you need at least the basic 2 chemistry courses and 1 more. She said, chemistry? Really? I don't like chemistry. And here's college algebra. You need to get college algebra done. You dropped that last year, right? Yeah, I dropped it. Well, there's college algebra. I have to have that too? And so we started down the list, and she didn't want to take any of those. And so, so finally I figured it out. She had gone back home to South Arkansas in the summertime and had a job clerking at a drugstore where she wore this nice little blue coat, air-conditioned building. And it was pretty cool. Got to talk to people, met people, and it was fun to her. And so she said, hey, I want to be So the point is, in order to have a life that matters, sometimes it costs you a lot. You have to make a preparation to do that. And of course, part of a democracy is to be an educated populace, isn't it? And so we have schools that's required because we want people who are educated. Sometimes our parents, sometimes at the university, parents thought their children went there in order to get a job so they could make good money and have a good life. And in a sense, that's true. But really, education is much more than that. To be able to fend for yourself, to think for yourself, to do for yourself, and to figure things out, right? So that's really the point of an education. So, and then you should hopefully be able to find a job out of all of that, but it's not just the vocational experience that you should have. So, you can remember that poor girl. I don't know what really ever happened to her, but and I'm sorry that I don't. But she didn't. I think she decided she didn't want to be a pharmacist anymore. And of course, lots of people tell their 5-year-old, well, you can be a medical doctor, And so we get all these people that just practice. They're never in the game. They just practice, right? And you want somebody in the game if they're going to doctor you, right? So, as Christians, the question really is, how do we live a life that matters? How do we be a congregation that matters? The elders have been talking about that a lot. How do we develop ourselves and our people so that we are doing what matters? And of course, now that we're in a wartime situation or a bad situation we have those same questions. So let's go ahead and follow a ways, and with the intention of coming back and bringing this to looking at what it means to be God's person and to be living a life that really matters. I think this is a really important question, but it's philosophical enough that you may say, well, I'm not very interested in that, but I hope that you are, and I hope that this provokes you to think a little bit. I would throw in a passage from Jeremiah 10, verse 23, which says basically that we're not able to direct our own steps, right? And so we need some help. I would also mention the creation. In the reading for this section, it mentions reading the biblical statement about creation in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. We were created, Adam first, right? Or after all the animals and so forth. When Adam was created, in the image of God, he was created. And God said it's not good for a man to be alone. He has another need. So he created Eve for that purpose, and those two were supposed to be suitable helpmeets to one another. And so we have a situation where we are dependent on one another. And in the church, the same thing is true, isn't it? We have a need to be among other Christians. We need to be encouraged by other Christians. We need to be mourned with by other Christians. We need to share our sufferings and our victories and our experiences with one another for the purpose of being what God wants us to be. And so if we're going to live a life that matters, we're going to have to be involved with other people. We're going to have to be involved with taking the gospel to every creature, to teach them the gospel and to make disciples. And all of these things are involved with living a life that matters. And how do we live that life, of course? That's the question that we hope to answer. But let's go through and see what Solomon says. First of all, he says it's all futile. If you look at this world without God, you won't see very much. Same things happen, as far as we can tell. We're looking forward to getting up in the morning. and of course somebody's going to say, but Jesus could come before then, right? Because we know that Jesus has already come and that he's coming again as Christians. So we've got more information than just what we see under the sun. But anyway, Solomon says it's just futile. There's nothing new. The same things are happening that always happens. The laws that God placed in to run this universe, this physical universe, are still in effect. They're still operating. If you drop a ball, it's still going to fall to the ground because of gravity, right? I can count on that, right? If I drop my keys, it's not going to go up. It's going to go down. And those physical properties are going to, they've always been there, and we always count on them. My famous saying is that physics kills, mathematics just explains how. And that's why I went the mathematics route, and because I didn't want to be dangerous. But anyway, so the first chapter is talking about how futile things are. So now I'm just going to go through each chapter and talk about some things that work. There's another quote on the back of your book of an interview with Ted Turner. Someone asked him how he felt about his shrewdness of making good business deals. And what does he say? Look at the back cover. He says, it's an empty bag. It's an empty bag. He was asked in an interview to reflect on the millions of dollars he had made through his shrewd business deals. He replied, sadly, it's an empty bag. In other words, money's not going to solve your problems. Wealth and fame is not going to solve your problems per se. There's a whole lot more to life than that. Chapter 2, the heading of chapter 2 is, and we can't study all of these, it's too long a book to study in one setting, but the futility of pleasure and possessions. We spend a lot of time gathering this stuff and trying to find a place to put it, right? I love books. My wife's frustrated with me because I got so many books in my office, and she thinks it's dusty, and so that's our biggest marital problem. Is I'm her biggest marital problem, which is standard, I guess. But anyway, she's nice about it, and we get along with it. But I love books, and so I have too many. So I said to myself in chapter 2, verse 1, come now, I will test you with pleasure, so enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. I said of laughter, it is senseless, and of pleasure, what does this accomplish? I explored with my mind how to refresh my body with wine, while my mind was guiding me wisely in how to seize foolishness until I could see what good there is for the sons of mankind to do under heaven for the few years of their lives. And he goes on from there. And who but Solomon, he could try it all, couldn't he? I mean, he controlled the world. Israel was the top nation. That was the top dog when Solomon was king. They even had a navy, you remember? And Solomon was a very, very rich man. But verse 9, then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not restrain my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor. And this was my reward for all my labor. Solomon was a very intense student of the world around him. He really was. He was amazing with some of the things that he did. And he says here he tried it, but it wasn't the answer. It was not the thing that brought satisfaction. It wasn't the thing that living a life that mattered would be. Okay? So that's the point. Any comments? We are small enough to talk. You need to talk loud, but hey. Any thoughts or comments you want to make? Please just raise your hand or start talking, and we'll be glad to do that. Chapter 3 is interesting because it kind of changes the scenery, because that's the one that says there's a time for everything. And he goes through, and this is kind of like there's a formula. You know, verse 8, for example, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And he's saying if you live in this world, those things are going to happen, right? And of course, the prophecy in the New Testament is there will be wars and rumors of wars, right? So we're stuck with, some misery. A time to tear apart, verse 7, and a time to sew together, a time to be silent, a time to speak. This really is a beautiful passage, isn't it? And by the way, chapter 1 that I read is poetic in its writing. The nature of writing is poetry, and the nature here is poetry. And that you should know that. A time to search and a time to give up as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, verse 6. And my wife would say, now's the time to throw away some of those books she got in your office. Verse 3, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to tear down, and a time to build up. Verse 4, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance. So there is times in our lives when we face these things. We have times when we mourn. We have times when we celebrate victories, when we dance, if you want to say it that way, when we jump up and down with joy and enjoy something that's good that's happened to us. Right below that, but right after verse 10, the heading in my Bible says, my New American Standard, by the way, which is what I'm reading from, God set eternity in the heart of mankind. So Solomon turns his thought, which is in chapter 3, he basically opens the door a little bit for introducing God, the fact that there is eternity in the hearts of man. Ecclesiastes 4. So chapter 4 talks about the evils of oppression. What in the world is that about? How are we oppressed? Some people say the government is oppressive, right? And sometimes they are, right? We would agree with that. Sometimes there may be bad laws or hard laws to deal with, or maybe unjust laws, or we have a system to try to adjudicate and fix problems that come up. And so the system's supposed to be self-healing, but it's not always. And of course that means there are problems. Of course people do it, so therefore it's not perfect. Okay? Remember, if you find a perfect church, you can't be a member of it, right? I mean, think about it. I couldn't be a member if everybody was perfect, because I'm not. And I know that. Now, chapter 5 turns its attention to your attitude toward God. What Solomon says here in chapter 5, verse 1, guard your steps as you go up to the house of God, and approach to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they are doing evil. Do not be quick with your mouth or impulsive in thought to bring up a matter in the presence of God. For God is in heaven and you are on the earth. Therefore let your words be few. For the dream comes through much effort, and the voice of a fool through many words. Jeremiah 10:23, we said a moment ago, says it's not within us to direct our own steps. That's a pretty scary kind of thing. So one of the things that this tells me is I need to examine what my relationship with God should be and also what it is right now, because it'll probably require some adjustments, right? So the attitude I have toward God, my understanding of who I am, who God is, and a relationship between us is a really big deal, right? And so at least Solomon gets to that in chapter 5, and he recognizes that there is an attitude that must be sought. And he asked, remember, he had lots of wisdom. Where did he get it? God gave it to him. And he was grateful to God for being given that wisdom. So verse 8 says, if you see oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in the province, do not be shocked at the sight, for one official watches over another official, and there are higher officials over them. After all, a king who cultivates the field is beneficial to the land. The foolishness of riches is the next topic in chapter 5. And of course, riches can be used for good. If a person has a lot, then a lot is expected of them, the New Testament tells us. And we have the opportunity to do good with God. But it's foolish. It says, the one who loves money will not be satisfied with money, not one who loves abundance with its income. This too is futility, he says in verse 10. When good things increase, those who consume them increase. So what is the advantage to their owners except to look for them, look at them? Chapter 6. The title of that section, according to a person, is The Futility of Life. The futility of life itself. All of us are here today. What will be the situation in 30 years? Some of us won't be here. And some of you others will be a lot older by about 30 years, right? Okay. It's a great time to be alive. I mean, I wouldn't be here, I think, without being born of the time I was, because I've had a heart valve replacement, which without, I don't think I would be alive. Pretty sure I would not be. But I have one, and it was not a pig, it's not a razorback, it was a longhorn. So you know, I didn't kill any razorback pigs to do that. But anyway, what a great thing medical science has done to be able to do things like that. And there's lots of examples like that. A lot of us are alive because of the care that we can have now that we couldn't have had earlier. My grandfather, who had the same problem, died when he was 52. And I'm more than 52. So, nevertheless, life is futile. We know we're not going to live forever in the flesh, the fleshly life. We do believe that our soul is going to live forever. Moving along very quickly, chapter 7 talks about obeying the rulers. He says, keep the commandments. Ecclesiastes 8 talks about wisdom and foolishness being contrasted. The smartest person in the world is still not able to direct his own steps. He still needs God. He still needs the wisdom of God Almighty. A good name is better than good oil. Verse 7, verse 1 says, and the day of one's death better than the day of one's birth. Interesting. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting, because that is the end of every person, and the living takes it to heart. And I encourage you to read the whole thing, but it is pretty depressing. Ecclesiastes 9, people are in the hand of God. So a reminder of the fact that God must be brought into this equation if you're going to make it work. And Ecclesiastes 10 is titled A Little Foolishness. 10 verse 1 begins by saying, dead flies turn a perfumer's oil rancid. So a little foolishness is more potent than wisdom and honor. A wise person's heart directs him toward the right, but the foolish person's heart directs him toward the left. Even when the fool walks along the road, his sense is lacking, and he demonstrates to everyone that he is a fool. It is the ruler's temper. If the ruler's temper rises against you, do not abandon your place, because composure puts great offenses to rest. Ecclesiastes 11 challenges us to reach out and live life. Sometimes people want to just curl into a fetal position and try to live life out without ever taking any chances or living life. But it says the title of that one is Cast Your Bread on the Waters, for you will find it after many days. Divide your portion to 7 or even to 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on earth. But you still cast your bread upon the waters. Verse 12, and this is the answer, this is what the book talks about in this section. And it says, remember God when you're young. And then he concludes it with the purpose of all of this. And I'm going to start with verse 9. In addition to being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, and he pondered, searched out, and arranged many proverbs. The preacher sought to find delightful words and to write words of truth correctly. Verse 11, the words of the wise are like goads, and masters of those collections are like driven nails. They are given by one shepherd. But beyond this, my son, be warned, the writing of many books is endless, and the excessive study is wearying to the body. Verse 11, this is what you should memorize. The conclusion, when everything has been heard, fear God, keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, everything which is good or evil. Of course, God is the creator, and we are responsible people made in his image, and he has done much to bring his grace to us so that we can have and enjoy salvation, so that we can be his child, so that we can be part of his spiritual family, so that we can spend eternity with him, but not in the flesh. In John chapter 10 and verse 10, Jesus said, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came so that they would have life and have it abundantly. So Jesus came so that we could have an abundant life. So I would like to find that, wouldn't you? I'm seeking that abundant life that Jesus came to give us. And it is by his grace that we have it, according to Ephesians chapter 2. He says in verse 11 of John 10, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters the flock. Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 is known as the Sermon on the Mount. These are the principles that Jesus gave us to have that abundant life, right? A lot of things that doesn't make what we would say is common sense. It tells us we behave differently because we belong to God and belong to Christ. If you live to be 70 years old, then you will live 613,200 hours. If you sleep 8 hours a night, then you'll be lost to consciousness 204,400 hours. And so that leaves the difference between those two, the time you have on the earth if you live to be 70. And Psalm says 70 is good. If you're strong, you might make it to 80. And I just made it to 80 about a month ago. So there you go. Anyway, to conclude our lesson, Jesus was talking to the Sadducees in Matthew 22, starting with verse 30. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. But regarding the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. When the crowds heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. So Jesus was teaching the Sadducees that they were wrong to neglect the resurrection because it was going to happen. The resurrection's a reality. The resurrection means a life after death, right? And then he goes on, the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees in verse 34. They gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Upon these two commands hang the whole law and the prophets. So I would tell you that tonight, that if you want to live a life that matters, that's your starting place. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. That would go a long way for a starting place to live a life that matters. So anyway, I hope you'll ponder this question. How do I live a life that matters? What is a life that matters? And we'll study that second thing next week. Thank you.